Kinship Carers UK is a charity for kinship carers with any order, regardless. It's run by carers for kinship carers.
Hello to everybody. I'm Suzanne, and my job is a play and filial therapist. So I work with children and families who are experiencing difficulties.
Right, okay. And can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, well, I work with children, face-to-face with children for play therapy. And I usually see children on a weekly basis for play therapy. But I also work with families, and that's called the filial therapy. And again, I work with families over a period of about 6 months to help them work through some of the difficulties that they're experiencing as a family.
Oh, thank you. Can you tell me what a play therapist does?
Well, we do lots of fun things, but we also, it's a serious job as well. And a play therapist is a therapist who works with children who are experiencing difficulties, which could be social, emotional, behavioural. It could be related to their early experiences of neglect, trauma or abuse. And they're struggling with everyday life and struggling with their emotions, their feelings, their behaviours. And my job is to help them manage that, really, and to work their way through it, to get some kind of mastery over some of those experiences that they've had. And I work very closely with the families as well.
Okay, what exactly is a play therapist? What is your role?
My role is it's just the same as any other kind of therapy, except that for children, it's mainly aimed at children, and for some children, being able to talk about things that happened to them or talk about their feelings is really difficult. So I use play and particular role play, symbolic play, sensory play, imaginary play, in order to help them kind of either recreate or to work their way through in their own space, in their own time, some of the difficult things that happen. So play is the medium that I use. It's the way I communicate with children, and the children can communicate with me. So for some children, they don't have to talk at all about what's happened to them. They can play it out.
Okay, so basically you work with children that have been through any sort of trauma. What ages do you work with?
It's usually about between 3 and 16.
Okay. And what do you do when you're playing with them? What therapeutic play? What is therapeutic play?
Well, play itself is therapeutic, and I think we sometimes think that children are playing just have fun, which they do, but actually they're playing out things. They're playing out emotions. They're trying things out. They're testing out scenarios. They're playing out. If they're playing with two toys that are interacting together, that's playing out different relationships, feelings of power, feelings of weakness. They could be playing out all sorts of different scenarios, and my role is to help them do that. So I would be reflecting back to them, naming some feelings for them, testing that out, helping them to get through any barriers that might be there that's stopping them, being able to let go of some of the past. And so the play itself is the key. Is the key, really. Sometimes children will spark a memory and they will talk about things, but mostly it's through the play that they are experiencing the things that has happened to them and helping them get through that, really.
Brilliant, thank you. That's helping me understand it a little bit more. How do you work? You say you work with them, you play with them. How do you do it? Do you sort of put them in a room and let them get on, or do you roll around with them?
Yeah, it's a real immerse. I'm really in there with them. I'm a part of that. So the toys and the play is important, but also so is my relationship and play therapy with them. So at the very beginning, they're usually having to find a space to trust me, really. We usually have a mat, and on that mat are toys all the way around. The toys that are specifically chosen for special play, that really lend themselves to imaginative play. And I'm there interacting with them, so they can decide. They choose what to play, and then I get in there and I'm a part of that. So sometimes I'm the customer at the shop, or I'm the nurse at the doctor's, or I'm whatever they decide the role is for me to be. I'm there.
And how about if the child can't communicate, or that, because I've got an extremely shy grandson, he wouldn't want to talk to you. How would you be able to work with a child like that?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes particularly at the very beginning, children do find it quite tricky, particularly children who, you know, keep all those worries and feelings inside. And so, like I said, the relationship is really important. So I would go very slowly to start with until he could trust me, really. So it's about helping him to understand how he's feeling too. So if he doesn't want to get involved and he's just standing and watching the toys, you know, I wouldn't be forcing him to do that. I'd be just reflecting back to him how hard he's finding it to get going. And maybe it's hard to trust me because I'm new. And so I wouldn't be shying away from those difficult feelings with him. I'd be helping him so that he knows I understand. You know, I'm using an empathy, really, you know, in the fact I can understand how hard it is. You've had difficult things happen to you and you don't want to talk about it, and that's okay. So there'd be certainly no pressure. But usually then children feel, after 2 to 3 sessions of play therapy, the trust begins to develop in that relationship.
So do you do this with the carer in the room or the parent in the room, or do they just stay for a couple of sessions, or do they just leave you to it?
With play therapy, it's usually me and the child. So I've had meetings with parents or carers and the adults, the main carers for the children beforehand, and I've found out all the information and the difficulties. And a decision's been made about whether it's play therapy or filial therapy, which we can talk about in a bit more detail in a minute or two. And if play therapy is the option that we've gone for, then that is just me and the child. And with play therapy, I usually do 5 or 6 sessions, and then I have a meeting with the parent, the carer, whoever that might be. And if social care are funding the work, or if they're part of it, then they would be involved as well. And at that meeting, I would be able to share a little bit about how things are going. But with play therapy, it's usually mainly me and the child in the session.
So I take it that it's all open. You explain to the carers, the parents, exactly what's going on and what hidden thoughts or feelings a child has.
Yeah, I mean, as play therapists, what we kind of do is, rather than saying on this day he played with this and he said this and he said that, or he did this and he did that, you group them together as themes. So that would be things that came up regularly. So it wouldn't, if he did something one day and he didn't do it again, probably wouldn't be that meaningful. But if it's something that he's doing more than once, then it becomes a theme, you know. So we would talk about, in terms of themes, I think confidentiality is really important for the child as well, because I always explain that to the child, that I'm not going to talk about you without telling you first what I'm going to say. And before the meeting with the parent or carer, I will be actually saying, this is what I think I've learned about you while we've been playing together, and I'm going to share that with your carer, because it's still their therapy session, it's still their session, you know. And the child's got then the chance to correct me if he thinks I'm wrong. And that in itself is useful. It's a useful discussion to have.
So in a way, it's sort of helping the child get to grips with what they've gone through. Does it help them correct certain behaviours as well, does it?
Yeah, play therapy is fantastic for that, because it works on a both conscious and unconscious level. So when we talk about things, it's conscious level, we're talking about it, but actually play, particularly sensory play, can trigger memories that are not always conscious, that they've not actually remembered fully, but they're just there, and so they've got the opportunity to play those out as well. And it gives them a chance to master some of those fears, the worries, you know, to practice what it's like to feel powerful when they've always felt weak, you know, and see how it feels on both sides of a relationship. That's a very common thing that children do in play therapy. They play out all different sides of a situation to see how it feels on all different sides.
How can we access, because I don't know what the cost is, or how, for kinship carers, you know, most of us don't get funding, if at all any. So how do we access your support? Can we go through schools, through people premium, or?
Yeah, there's a number of different routes, actually. If your child is struggling and you go to your school to talk to them, then, like you mentioned, pupil premium is available for all foster, adopted and SGA children. So school could fund it through that. That is probably the easiest way, and to do that is to contact your social worker, or the social worker that, you know, work with the child originally, because it is an expensive service. You can also sometimes go through some charities. Some charities do fund that. That depend on your area really for that. But Google's great for showing that. And if you want to make sure that you're finding a good quality play therapist that is registered, then if you go on to the British Association of Play Therapists website, BAPT.
Lovely, thank you.
If you go on there, you can search your area as well. And you'll find that then for the ones that are actually registered on there.
So let me just recap. We can go through post-order support team or the local authority that actually issued the SGO, and you can ask for an assessment of need, and you can go through that way. So if your child's having behaviour issues, that is another way of getting it, as well as your pupil premium through school. Yeah, so that's all through Children's Service. You can actually speak to the virtual head of the school. So you can ask your head teacher if they can put you with a virtual head. Some local authorities allow 6 sessions with a virtual head, and they can put into place all the things that your child needs. You did say it's expensive. How much is a session?
It varies. It depends. And there is the other option, just before I forget, is to go through your Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service, which is CAMS.
Right.
Because some CAMS services do have play therapists, and your best route to start with there is to go to your GP, and then they can make the referral to CAMS. So that is the other option. In terms of cost, it varies widely, but you're talking about a minimum of £50 a session, upwards from there, really. So
it's best to
try and get it funded. And the other reason it's best to try and get it funded is because, you know, we don't always know how long and how many sessions a child will need. You know, so you might start off saying that they might need, say, 16 sessions. But then as you get going, they actually need longer than that. So getting it funded is definitely the way to go first, rather than trying to fund it yourself.
Yes, yeah, good idea. Some good points there. Thank you. Earlier on, you mentioned something called filial. Would you like to explain that one?
Yeah, it's a strange word, isn't it? Filial. It's a form of play therapy. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, in play therapy, it's me and the child, and then every 6 to 8 sessions, I would have a meeting with the family to share those themes. With filial therapy, I don't actually have the sessions with the child. I train the carer or the parent so that they can do the sessions. And then, and in my job as a filial therapist, I support the family. I do the training, and then I support them in understanding what's happening in that special play session. What are those themes, and helping them to be able to respond in a therapeutic way to help the child, and then be able to use those skills in everyday life.
Wow. And how do you do that? Do we come to you?
I mean, at the moment, with the current situation, I'm working remotely for filial therapy. Play therapy at the moment for me is on hold because I can't go into family homes where I would usually work. I will be starting schools again in September, the ones that I work in school. But normally I would go and work with the family in their home. And try to do it as flexibly as possible around working, around the children being in bed. So I already do quite a lot of remote work actually, anyway. But at the moment it's all done remotely. So it's by Skype really.
So can I don't want to be ageist, but what's the oldest and what's the youngest, as in the carer range? Can it be a sibling carer to a great grandparent? Because we've got some older carers that are grandparents.
Age is irrelevant, really. You know, I've worked with families of all age ranges. Really, it's more about that person who's got that relationship with the child that's the most important. And where possible, if there's 2 carers, you know, if it's a grandma and granddad, or then I would work with them both, because we want to make the changes right across the piece really for the child, don't we? We don't want one parent saying one thing, one grandparent saying another, and then it's conflicting. So I try wherever possible to work with both carers, but no age is no No
Does it
problem.
involve getting on the floor? And you
Yes, it does.
going on
Yeah,
the floor?
good question. Yeah, it does, but you know, I'm not as young as I used to be, and having sat on my knees for a lot of years doing play therapy, they're not so great. But yeah, it is. I mean, mostly, unless they're teenagers, where some teenagers like to be more table based. You know, we adjust the toys slightly for teenagers as well. But for most of the young children, yeah, it's on the floor. But you know, you can sit on a cushion. You can, you know.
So is it helpful for families then, sort of, if you've got a child that's aggressive per se, or very shouty, very angry, does it help that situation with the balance of getting that carer to sort of take control? Not control is the wrong word, isn't it?
But
But
to help the child who's maybe got control
yeah.
problems. Yeah, I mean, this is the beauty of it, really, is of both play and filial therapy, is that it goes to where the child's need are, whether they are a child that acts out, you know, that they're very loud and you know, you need to hear me, I need to be in control, you know, when I'm in control I feel better, you know, or whether it's a child who's very, you know, goes withdrawn and inside and finds it really hard and maybe is a bit of a people pleaser. It doesn't matter the scope of those problems, really, because the skills that I teach families meets the child wherever they're at. So it's about reflecting that back to the child, you know, feeling like you need to shout. It's hard for you to be heard, but I'm here listening. You know, is a reflection that, and the special play session that we do in filial therapy is like the practice ground, really. So the child can learn a new way of responding. And eventually we'll try and put that into everyday life situations. But while you're on that mat, it's like a practice for the adult to learn the skills, and my practice for the child to see, oh, actually, I don't have to shout. There's maybe another way. And it's a really great space to do that, which is not too challenging, because play still feels like their world. The play is their world, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
And we're getting into the world with them.
So when you have a child that has faced harm, neglect in the very early ages of life, and perhaps bereavement, would it help face those issues? And I mean, would the carer tackle those issues with you, or do you tackle the issues with the child and the carers?
I mean, when a child has experienced trauma, abuse, neglect from a very early age, then it has had some effect on their brain development, most likely, and it's created sometimes insecure attachment. You've probably heard people talk about attachment, and so that then their way of coping is unnecessary now while they're safe, but it wasn't unnecessary when they needed it. So sometimes a child that's still experiencing trauma would need to do play therapy first.
Oh, right, okay.
And that's usually the decision that's made in that very early meeting, really, is, you know, how traumatized is this child? Do they need play therapy with an experienced play therapist first, or can we go to filial, where I'm helping the carer to learn those skills and to transfer those skills to the child? So that's a decision that's made in that early bit, really, from when I gather information.
Yeah. From my experience, it's quite difficult finding out what your grandchild has experienced from their parent, and then having to work through that yourself, because you've got to accept that perhaps it was your son or your daughter or your sister or your brother that caused harm to this child, whatever, you know, in whichever way, and you've got to learn to deal with that. I think that's a gap. So do you help the carers that way, or
both in filial and play therapy? Definitely, you know, the support for the carers is paramount, really, to it working, because if you're not supported, then you can't support the child. So yeah, definitely, I think it's a massively important thing, because it's a huge challenge. Definitely, and there are things that you can do yourselves. And the magic box bit that we're going to talk about next time would be one of those things, strategies. But there's also lots of different things that you can learn about, like in terms of therapeutic language. And gradually I'm starting to add things to my website to kind of build up that resource bank. But if you go on there now, there's some actual resources that you can print off for free. There's some blogs on there about things like therapeutic language, etc., just to give you some clips. In the Magic Box guide, there is a lot more detail there about, you know, the kind of language, the kind of ways that you can structure things. So there's lots of things that you can still do.
Enjoyed talking to you, and I'm sure everybody else has enjoyed listening. So on behalf of everyone, thank you, Suzanne.
I've enjoyed spending time with you, and see you next week.
Yeah, thank you. And can we just say again, it's your website is
sweetfamilies.com,
and your Facebook page is
just Sweet Families.
Sweet Families.
Look out for the bumblebee.
The bumblebee. That's how I found you, is the bumblebee.
The bumblebee.